Okay, we'll get started. I want to make sure everyone can actually hear and see the screen. If you're having any difficulties at any time, just let me know. You can raise your hand or just chat. Send me a message in the chat field. You can also press *6 if you're on the phone. And if you can't hear me or even see the slides, just let me know that as well. So good evening and welcome to the webinar, I Believe I Can Fly, Conquering the Battle with Performance. My name is Precious Vines and I will be your host. Thank you so much for tuning in to this webinar. It is my hope that this webinar proves to be both helpful as well as insightful for you. I would like to do a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please note that as a participant, you may call in via phone, and I have posted the number on the slide as well, 712-770-4075. The access code is 724656. I've also posted the online meeting link as well, and the online meeting ID is event 70. And if you want to press *6 to make a comment, you can mute and unmute yourself that way. Just make sure that you press *6 to mute yourself again. And I encourage you all to comment throughout the discussion. I want it to be more of an interactive discussion where we're able to collaborate together. In order to expound more on our discussion, I will also upload the worksheets and presentation note slides to my website, which is www.thesweetesttransition.com. I would now like to provide a brief introduction of myself. Again, my name is Precious Vines, and I'm a current resident of Raleigh, North Carolina. By trade, I'm an attorney, educator, as well as entrepreneur. I also have the privilege of being a first-time author of the soon-to-be-released book, The Sweetest Transition, Lessons in Life, Love, and Self-Discovery. This book is a memoir/self-help book about transitions. Within this book, I discuss several psychosocial topics, including identity, fear of rejection, transparency, performance-based thinking, as well as love. I'm sure that you all can agree that these topics are universal to many of our experiences. As a way of introducing the Sweetest Transition to you, I thought it would be fitting to explore some of the topics within the book in a webinar discussion. Many of you may be wondering exactly why this webinar is entitled, I Believe I Can Fly, Conquering the Battle with Performance. First, the title, I Believe I Can Fly, comes directly from a chapter in the book that chronicles my battle with performance. I talk about the lifelong journey that I've had with my fear of rejection. The chapter begins with my sharing a recurring dream that I have had over the years. In this dream, I magically have the ability to fly when danger appears. I also share with you how I desire this same ability to fly to escape the restrictions that I feel. These restrictions were not created by others, but by me, someone who feels trapped by the need to perform. And this is why I believe that this webinar is both timely and necessary, because there are many of us that are trapped by this feeling, this need to restrict ourselves within a performance-based mentality. So let's now shift gears to talk about the targeted outcomes for our discussion. As a result of our discussion together, you will be able to identify the characteristics of performance-based thinking, the triggers and unhealthy perspectives that cause performance-based thinking, the critical steps needed to improve your mindset, creative solutions that support a healthy lifestyle, and at the end of this webinar, we will have developed a better way to view ourselves. In addition, we will have created some action steps to take to support a healthy lifestyle. So let's jump into our discussion. So how did I choose this topic? To be perfectly honest with you, performance-based thinking has limited the way that I've lived my life, and I wanted to lift the lid on how each of us can make better choices. I desire a better way of living for myself, and I believe that you want that as well. After years of living on the hamster wheel of performance, I wanted to stop limiting myself from enjoying the fullest life possible. Having a performance-based mentality for me has been a hard topic to dissect because I've lived in that space for so long. Over time, in both my professional and personal life, I developed this law and order type mentality. Now, this mentality governed my daily interactions and ability to make decisions. Performance-based thinking for me was a way of living and a standard of life. Now, some examples of how performance-based thinking looked in my life included, and you'll see some of these here: a law and order mentality, my never-ending to-do list, the habit of stacking accomplishment as well as achievement, placing my emotions in a dormant state to get the job done, and allowing my fears to drive my need to work incessantly. Now, in addition, as a performance-based thinker, I developed the habit of hiding my identity. This required me to play and look the part for whatever role I was in at the moment. No matter what role it was, it never varied from the standard script I used to play the part. I always chose the role of the performer. The facade of perfection was exhibited on all fronts. An example would be when I would hide my thoughts and feelings from others in order to shield myself from their reaction or their perceived judgment. I was not being true to myself regarding how I truly felt, and I created a cover for how I really felt and what I really wanted. I did not permit myself an outlet to deal with the frustrations that I felt, and this is only a portion of my experience. The nature of performance-based thinking looks differently for each of us. Can you identify with any of my experience? And I'm opening it up for your comments at this time. Okay. If you all do identify with any of my experience as I continue to share, feel free to jump in. Now, I want to move to our next slide. What is performance-based thinking? Performance-based thinking is a mentality that uses your performance to gain acceptance and approval from others. I define it as also a law and order mentality. Now, this governs your need to accomplish and achieve and also seek validation from outside sources. Some people know that as a work-based mentality. Within a performance-based mentality, you say yes to requests made by others, even when you want to say no. You take responsibility for others' actions to save face or just to keep the peace. You overlook your own needs to ensure that you meet the needs of others in spite of the fact that it's not your responsibility to do so. You are constantly juggling various priorities and obligations and work harder to make it all fit into your schedule. You fail to take breaks and check in with yourself to see how you feel about your life and endless to-do lists. Now, does any of this sound familiar? A performance-based mentality limits our ability to experience better relationships with ourselves as well as with others. In this performance-based mentality, you are trapped in a mindset that stifles and hinders you in various ways. I want to look at some characteristics of performance-based thinking. Now, some characteristics that I found for performance-based thinking include a constant need for achievement, people-pleasing, anxiety, overcommitment and overscheduling, always seeking affirmation, acceptance, and approval from outside sources. And those sources could include your job or your work, relationships you have with friends, family, significant other, or even organizations that you may be affiliated with. There's also a lack of boundaries. And we'll talk a little bit more about boundaries in a few slides in the future. A lack of transparency and vulnerability in relationships. Now, these are just a few of the characteristics of performance-based thinking. However, I do believe that the causes or triggers are the same for the majority of us. I want to shift gears again and dig deeper into the triggers of performance-based thinking. I want to take a moment, though, just to pause to see if there are any comments or if any of you can identify with these characteristics.
Hello?
Yes?
Well, I was listening to you describe a lot of them, and I can identify with some very early in my younger years as a young adult, because I was like, believed that when people would tell me certain things or wanted certain things of me, that it was required of me to fulfill those things, whether it was something that I wanted to do, but like you say, pleasing others and all of that. And some of it came from traditional values that I have been taught over the years. So I really could identify with that.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Let's now look at some of the triggers. Thank you so much for your comment. I believe that it's important to know why you may be affected by performance-based thinking. So let's look at some of these triggers. We talked about a need for validation and acceptance. There's also a fear of rejection, a lack of identity, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, low self-esteem and self-worth, and desiring a sense of belonging. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. However, this list does contain many of the triggers that I have experienced. And I want to share with you some details regarding how these triggers looked in my life, and I'll give you the opportunity in a moment to share your experiences as well. My performance-based mentality was definitely rooted in my need for validation and acceptance. I held on to the need for acceptance and the desire to please anyone who would validate me. Now, this included anyone who would give me the check mark or the gold star. This stems from my internalizing the need to find my way in life, as well as the need to define myself by looking through the eyes of others. When you look through the eyes of others to find acceptance, you are going about finding acceptance the wrong way. And I do want to make sure that that actually is the point you all remember, so I'll repeat that. When you look through the eyes of others to find acceptance, you are going about finding acceptance the wrong way. And this is something I had to learn because I was using an unhealthy perspective. Now, my performance-based mentality was also rooted in a fear of rejection as well. I feared that others would reject me because I did not feel the role that I thought they wanted me to play. My fear of rejection led me to strive for perfection in many areas of my life. My performance-based mentality was also rooted in my lack of understanding my identity as a person and as a Christ follower. I had an inaccurate idea about myself and who I was, and as a result, I lacked boundaries in my life and in my relationships. I desired healthy relationships with others. However, without having a healthy relationship with myself, I would not be able to have a healthy relationship with anyone. And as a result, the unhealthy relationship with myself led me to attract others in my life that also had an unhealthy relationship with themselves as well. So you see that the performance-based mentality has a long reach. It grabs a hold of negative relationships and produces harmful consequences. I would now like to stop to see if any of you can identify with this. Have any of you attracted unhealthy relationships in your life as a result of your unhealthy relationship with yourself? And anyone can jump in.
Well, I can answer that. I think that I have, and I learned from it because of all the things that you've said already. That thinking more of others and trying to please others, and performance-based than really trying to please yourself or find out really who you were first before you went that route.
Okay. And I agree. I think finding yourself is one of the things that I'm still trying. And I think that the book is definitely part of my journey in finding myself. And even doing this presentation, when I was writing some of this, I was still discovering more parts of myself and what the actual definition of love is. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And I think that's one of the bigger keys here, to look at yourself and find out specifically who you are as a person. I think that plays a big part in all of this. And thank you for your comment. Anybody else want to jump in? Okay. All right, so let's move to our next slide. I have a few questions, and you all can definitely write these questions down if you don't want to answer them now, and if you want to jump in the chat, you can. You can also unmute yourself with pressing *6. And I want to see if you can identify with any of the triggers that we just discussed. And the triggers that we just discussed was, number 1, a need for validation and acceptance. Number 2, a fear of rejection. Number 3, a lack of identity. Number 4, low self-esteem and self-worth. And number 5, desiring a sense of belonging. So the question I have here is, can you identify with any of these triggers that we just discussed? And which trigger can you most identify with and why? And also, are there any similarities in my story that you can connect with? So you can answer any of those questions if you want to jump in. And I encourage you to continue to think on those questions. Feel free to write them down, and I will post these in the worksheet so you'll have them to kind of journal. I want to now shift gears and look at the connection between performance-based thinking and unhealthy perspectives. Performance-based thinking is rooted in unhealthy perspectives. A performance-based thinker has a flawed perspective in 3 main areas. So let's talk about those 3 unhealthy perspectives a bit more. Unhealthy perspective 1, identity and sense of self. Let's first define identity. Identity is defined as the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. Your identity tells who you are and what you are. Identity includes your sense of self as well. Your sense of self is defined as ideas about the type of person one really is. If you have an unhealthy perspective regarding your identity, you seek to find the information regarding who or what you are in outside sources. You will not take an internal approach to finding your identity. A person that has a healthy perspective of his or her identity acts in a different manner. Having a healthy identity or sense of self means that you possess the information firsthand. You own the facts of who and what you are. You own accurate ideas about the type of person you really are. In addition, when you have a strong sense of identity, you realize that you are accepted without any other qualifiers. Your identity stands alone and apart from your performance, how others see or view you, or whether they accept or reject you. Who you are as a person, a human being, stands apart from someone else's response or liking of you. I firmly believe that this is one of the most critical first steps that one needs to take to stop the battle with performance. Take the necessary steps in acknowledging the fact that you are accepted without any other qualifiers. Having a healthy perspective regarding your identity means that you fully understand who and what you are first and foremost, before you enter into a relationship with anyone else. Your relationship with yourself is healthy, whole, and accurate. Take the necessary steps and develop a healthy, whole, and accurate relationship with yourself. This will counter your need to be a performer. Let's now look at the second unhealthy perspective of a performance-based thinker. Unhealthy perspective number 2, love. Love is defined as a strong affection for another arising out of kinship or personal ties. If you look at the definition closely, you will see that there are 2 components. The first component is a strong affection. The second component is a kinship or personal tie. In order to love ourselves, we first have to develop a kinship or relationship with ourselves. You must connect with the inner core of you and all that makes you your unique individual self. Only after you have captured a clear understanding of your inner core, your personality, your likes and dislikes, can you then demonstrate a strong affection towards yourself. I believe that we often gravitate towards performance because we have failed to discover parts of ourselves. For me, the parts of myself that I had not discovered included a fearless spirit that was able to stand up to the challenges of life. And I think sometimes we don't really believe in ourselves as much as we should. But discovering that fearless spirit was something that was important for me to find. I had not discovered the power that lied in my vulnerability. I had yet to embrace the strength of my transparency with others. And in my lack of discovery, I knew an incomplete version of myself. Therefore, I was unable to bond or connect with the totality of me. I was unable to express love towards myself because I failed to fully know myself. I had an unhealthy perspective of love. And I think this part was one of the most important parts to me in doing this presentation, is realizing that you can't fully know yourself if you don't know all parts of yourself. Can anyone identify with that? Okay. Think on it a moment longer. I'm going to go to the second part, though, because we have a little bit more. You must know that an unhealthy perspective of love is found in the need of performance. Your need for performance is not rooted in love, but in the belief that you have to do something or be a certain person to earn the love and respect of others. An unhealthy perspective of love means that you don't love who you are outside of what you can do, perform, or act. I urge you to take the necessary step in your life to capture a clear understanding of you and the various facets of your personality, your strengths, as well as your weaknesses. Gaining a complete picture of each and every part of you is the first step towards learning to love yourself. Now, I would like to pause and see if there are any questions or comments, and I do have a few questions for you. Feel free to let me know your thoughts. The first 2 unhealthy perspectives that we have covered included unhealthy perspective 1, identity and sense of self, and unhealthy perspective number 2, love. Are there any parts of the first 2 unhealthy perspectives that you have struggled with? You can explain why and share your experience. And I'll give you a moment to think about that. And I'll repeat it again in case you're on the phone. The first two unhealthy perspectives that we have covered included unhealthy perspective number 1, identity and sense of self, and unhealthy perspective number 2, love. Are there any parts of the first two unhealthy perspectives that you have struggled with? You can explain why and share your experience.
Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the perspective I wanted to share is related to identity and sense of self-worth. I grew up in a very critical household, and I think I learned that in order to be accepted that I had to be perfect. And so I think that filtered an unhealthy perspective when it came to that of identity and self-worth versus what you're saying, which is ultimately that it doesn't have to be predicated on other people's perspectives.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think sometimes that is part of the reason why we have unhealthy perspectives is because of how we've grown up or things that we've digested throughout the years, and we internalize those things and we take those unhealthy perspectives as being normal. So it becomes a normal way of us actually interacting with ourselves as well as others. And I think sometimes even, for me, I've been critical, probably overcritical of myself, even in doing this presentation, of trying to reach some level of perfection, which I'm thinking, well, Precious, the presentation is about performance-based thinking. So there's no need to perform to get this perfect because it's about performance-based thinking. But I think you have to practice more often than not talking to yourself and being mindful when you get in those, mind traps of thinking and overthinking something and being too critical of yourself. And I think that is a process that you have to go through, on a regular basis, because sometimes you don't even know when you've kind of fallen in that trap. But I do thank you for your comment. Any other comments? Okay. I want to shift gears and look at the next unhealthy perspective. Unhealthy perspective number 3, boundaries. A boundary is defined as something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. A boundary determines the extent of your responsibility and ownership within your life. Boundaries also determine the extent of ownership you take within the lives of those you are connected to. As a performance-based thinker, you fail to define your boundaries. For myself, I lack parameters in knowing when I needed to do or not to do something. I constantly question myself. Should I respond or not respond? I was confused about whether I should say yes or no to a particular request because I was so used to being a performer. I did not know how to pause and momentarily reflect on what truly was the best option for me. I lacked proper boundaries in my relationship with myself, as well as the relationship I had with others. Now, this may look like an open door for some. The door is constantly open for any request, any need, or want of others. As a performance-based thinker, you never see that there is a need for boundaries in your ability to please other people. An unhealthy perspective of boundaries becomes ingrained in the mind of the performance-based thinker. Having been a performance-based thinker for so many years, I did not understand the need for, nor the importance of setting boundaries. I did not understand the importance of fixing limits on my time, energy, and resources. With this unhealthy perspective, I use performance to control people's view and response of me. In order to overcome the unhealthy perspective, I encourage you to take the necessary steps to start considering the best options for you based upon your current schedule, obligation, and circumstances. Once you do that, you will start to gain control of your life when you put limits on the time you spend in certain areas of your life. Take the necessary steps to put boundaries around your commitment level. When you create boundaries in your life, you create more balance in your life. Now, let's look at 2 critical steps to take to improve your mindset. As previously discussed, a performer does not know how to define his or her boundaries from an accurate viewpoint. A performance-based thinker would define boundaries based upon the need to feel whole and validated from the outside. The performer does not use an internal compass of love and respect to guide him or her. Therefore, the first step to improve your mindset would be to develop and use an internal compass of love and respect in all relationships. An internal compass of love and respect should govern your actions. First, this internal compass will first acknowledge that you are capable of giving as well as receiving healthy amounts of love and respect. Secondly, this internal compass will prompt you to consider how you have felt in previous encounters within that specific relationship. This looks more or less like an inventory check. Finally, this compass will check for a genuine level of reciprocity in your encounters within that relationship. This allows you to assess whether this relationship is mutually beneficial and is both valuable and positive for you as well as the other person or group. And I think that's one thing that we have to learn is there has to be reciprocity in relationships because there's value for both parties. Now, critical step number 2 is affirm yourself on a regular basis. Affirmations are extremely important for a performance-based thinker. You should develop, memorize, and recite affirmations on a consistent basis. Performance-based thinking is rooted in insecurity. You feel a need to prove yourself so that you feel better about yourself and your abilities. Therefore, there is never a cutoff point in your thoughts, actions, and commitments. First, utilize affirmations to restructure your thinking. You will be led by the truth of your worth versus being led by an insecure place. Secondly, affirming yourself supports your self-esteem. You no longer need to perform and do more to feel better about yourself. And lastly, affirming yourself allows you to mitigate your need to overcommit. You recognize the importance of your maintaining your well-being. We just discussed taking the following 2 critical steps. Step 1, develop and use an internal compass of love and respect in all relationships. And step number 2, affirm yourself on a regular basis. Which of these 2 steps do you find that you need to do more of and why? Feel free to let me know the answer to that question. And I'll read the question again. This is something I think you can definitely think on throughout the week. Step 1 was develop and use an internal compass of love and respect in all relationships. And step 2 was affirm yourself on a regular basis. Which of those 2 steps do you find that you need to do more of and why? For me, affirmations is something that I do on a regular basis. And I started out doing them like in the morning. I would do them when I first got up. And in the evening, and basically what I did was I took 10 Bible verses and I made them into affirmations. So basically I was memorizing, what that statement said about me, affirming myself, and I typed it out and I laminated it and I did it in the morning and in the evening. And since I memorized it, at this point I can kind of recite those throughout the day depending upon what may be going on. But I try to pick affirmations that pinpointed areas of my life that I needed to affirm more. So I had to have one that dealt with faith versus fear. I also did one in reference to God's love for me. And I think I had a couple of more about God's hand of blessing being on my head. So there are various different verses, and Psalm 139 was probably where I took more of them from because that's one of my favorite books of the Bible. But it just depends upon what you want it to do for affirmations. But I find that that's something that I need to do on a regular basis is just really recite those, because it really gives me that internal compass of love and respect for myself, which is necessary first when I find myself getting off course. And this actually comes, sometimes when you're getting anxious throughout the week. All right, let's move to critical solution number 1. I want to look at some creative solutions that support a healthy lifestyle. So the first creative solution is get uncomfortable. What I found to be key to finding creative ways to get out of the performance trap is to explore ways to get out of your comfort zone. A performance-based mentality is rooted in fear and the need to have control. The critical piece of the puzzle for me was when I realized that I needed to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. I needed to take the opposite approach in my interactions with people, relationships, and various roles that I had in my life. I needed to put myself in situations where I did not know the outcome and could not predict whether someone would like me or not, or if I could provide the answer or solution. These places did not resemble the places that I was generally comfortable with, but my ability to work harder and strive more was not applicable in those situations. And to be honest with you, it has been a prayer of mine for God to show me more parts of my identity that I did not know. And in praying that prayer, those situations have actually presented themselves in many areas of my life. If you want some general application steps that you could try on your own, I suggest that you look to discover things that you've never tried before. Then actually commit to trying them. Voluntarily put yourself in situations where you are unsure of the outcome and stretch yourself to meet people with diverse interests and experiences. For me, this included taking vacations by myself and meeting new people as I traveled. This required me to be more socially intuitive to get connected to my surroundings versus my normal way of doing life by a rule book. Another example would be to take classes where you are out of your element. This will be a class where you have no background or skill in that particular area. This requires you to open yourself up to a new topic as a beginner. Therefore, you're not able to perform and stack accomplishment or achievement because you're entering into new territory. Let's look at creative solution number 2, practicing vulnerability. Vulnerability is one area that performance-based thinkers fail to embrace. Vulnerability is often perceived as a weak state to be in. However, when you're able to be vulnerable, you're able to counter your fear of rejection. Vulnerability requires you to relinquish the facade that your performance solves each and every issue that you have. In my experience, I had to learn that my ability to share my struggles and insecurities was actually powerful. I needed to expose the areas of my life that I had no control over. Being vulnerable with others allowed me to share my life concerns and realize that I was accepted no matter what. I was also able to let others better connect with me on a genuine level. Upon making that connection, the need to perform lessened in my life. Application steps that I would take would include starting a journal to first capture your thoughts and feelings. A performance-based mentality often stifles your ability to access your true emotions. Starting a journal will allow you to put a voice to your feelings. I will also suggest that you start with small steps by being transparent in conversations with others. This may not come as natural as you would like for it to be. However, start with a trusted friend or relative. You can simply share with them your thoughts on an area of your life or a situation that you don't know how to handle or think about. This doesn't have to be something that you plan. It could just naturally occur in your normal conversation. I encourage you to share in small but insightful ways, and being vulnerable will start to be more natural for you. Let's look at creative solution number 3, pace yourself. For performance-based thinkers, pacing yourself is important. Someone who is a performer is led by his or her feelings and fears. In new settings, for example, you may feel the need to gain the approval of others to belong without recognizing the process of getting to know people and forming a natural bond. Therefore, you generate ideas connected to performance to feel connected or gain a sense of belonging. Your ideas are based in the need to do something versus just being who you are in that setting. In your manner of doing, you go about finding better ways to give or perform more, providing more energy to a relationship or a group of people without first finding out more about that person or group. One application step would include giving yourself permission to wait a designated amount of time before adding a new commitment to your schedule. You may investigate the commitment or group, gathering information before you decide to make a permanent decision. Another application step would be to ask yourself some questions with various commitments you may have in your life. And this could be actually with current commitments. And I'll share some of those questions that you should ask. The first question is, what does my gut tell me about making this commitment? And I actually had to use that one, to be honest with you, yesterday. What does my gut tell me about making this commitment? And I want to point out, in general, this is where I urge people to check first, including myself, before moving forward, because your gut often tells you what you need to know from the offset. The second question is, do I have enough information regarding this person or group to make a larger investment of my time, energy, or resources? And if not, what additional information do I need to make a decision? The third question is, how will making a larger investment of my time, energy, and resources affect my life and current obligations? Be as honest as possible. If necessary, pull out your schedule and map it out. I want to open up to see if anyone has any comments on any of those creative solutions, if you've tried them or do you think that you may be able to try them within the next couple of weeks. Okay, we're going to move to our next slide. We're actually about to wrap it up. We have covered a lot of information in this webinar, and I do want to thank you again for joining me in this discussion. I would like to leave you with some food for thought. Always remember that you are accepted without any other qualifiers. Your identity stands alone and apart from your performance. You are valuable and priceless and deserve to live the fullest life possible. Take time to capture a clear understanding of who you were created to be. Discover all the parts that make up your identity and learn to love a complete version of you. Remember that you're worth the investment. Finally, I would like to extend an invitation for you to check out my website, www.thesweetesttransition.com, for more information regarding this book, The Sweetest Transition, Lessons in Life, Love, and Self-Discovery. I encourage you to share this with your network, and I will also post this presentation, the presentation slides, as well as the worksheets on the website as well. And feel free to check in there for future events. You may also email me at books@preciousvines.com with any questions or concerns. Are there any questions at this time? If not, I want to thank you so much for your participation. This concludes this webinar.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it didn't do it. I thought it did. Wait. I might have to actually